Thomas Alva Edison, born 1847, died 1931. Edison gave us light, heat, power, music and the movies. He made innovation from science and made a science of innovation. Thomas Edison was America's most productive inventor in the 19th century, and as such remains so into the 21st. His greatness lies not in any single invention, not even in the whole panoply, but in what he did with his own and other men's cleverness. The single invention for which he is most remembered, the incandescent bulb, is emblematic. The idea of the bulb itself had been around for 50 years. Many other inventors had tried to heat filaments to incandescence. Ira Flatow, the science reporter, gave up counting at 23. The light Edison made was a marked advance, but the piercing vision, and it was Edison's alone, was how he would bring light and power to millions of homes and offices. The technology historian Ruth Cowan writes that Edison from the beginning understood that he wanted to build a technological system and a series of businesses to manage that system. Edison created innovation from science, but did make a science of innovation, the exploitation of invention to build entire industries. Nobody had done anything like that before. What were the sources of Edison's gifts? Little Al, as he was called then, did not do well at school. Part of the trouble was that he missed years of public school lessons from a series of infections, one of which seriously damaged his hearing, and his father fell behind in paying the fees at little private catch-up schools. He was also of a temperament that rejected any kind of rote learning. He could reach understanding only by doing and making. It was this predilection for experiment that found him one morning in 1853 standing in the cobbled public square in his birthplace of Milan, Ohio, to receive a whipping by his father. Just to see what it would do, he had set a little fire in the family barn and burned it to the ground. His father, Sam, was a handsome jack-of-all-trades of Dutch-American extraction, a political iconoclast who had to flee Canada in the big rebellion against the Crown in 1836-7. Sam Edison was variously a tailor, sailor, carpenter, innkeeper, miller, and became a lighthouse keeper on moving his family of 3, diminished by death, to a big rented house in Port Huron, Michigan in 1854. He had endless schemes for getting rich that never quite came off. Nevertheless, the little family was comfortable by the standards of the day, if erratically in debt. The salvation of Al was his very protective mother, Nancy, a devout Presbyterian who always dressed in black in memory of 3 children dead in infancy. Al was basically brought up as an only child. Big brother and sisters were in their teens, and she divined that he had a visual imagination and unusual powers of reasoning. She read him classics like Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire and Sear's History of the World, and when he kept asking questions she couldn't answer, like, what is electricity? What is pitch made of? She put into his hands at the age of 9 R.G. Parker's A School Compendium of Natural and Experimental Philosophy. It illustrated simple home experiments in chemistry and electricity, and Al attempted every one of them, setting him on the trajectory of his life. His first job, secured by his father, was to climb aboard a train at Port Huron at 7 o'clock in the morning with bundles of copies of the Detroit Free Press newspaper to sell to passengers on the 3-hour journey to Detroit and back. He persuaded the train conductor to let him store berries, fruit and vegetables, as well as sandwiches and peanuts, and deputed 2 other boys to sell the food for him. He produced probably the world's first train newspaper, writing, hand-setting and printing 24 issues of the Weekly Herald, a sheet of local news for which he got 500 subscriptions from passengers at 8 cents a time. He made a cheeky habit of walking into the composing room of the Detroit Free Press to find out what the next day's headlines would be, and a year into the Civil War, on April 6, 1862, he scored a coup. He saw proof of next day's sensational front page, reporting that as many as 60,000 might be dead in a battle at Shiloh. Actual deaths were 24,000. He had enough money to buy only 300 papers to sell on the train and wanted more. The distribution manager refused his request, so Edison talked his way into the sanctum of the fierce managing editor Wilbur Story and persuaded him to part with 1,000 copies on credit. He had already bribed officials at the railroad office to telegraph the fact that there had been a battle to every train station on the way back to Port Huron. He was mobbed at the first stop, raised prices every station thereafter, and ended with a sell-out auction in his home station, and the princely sum of around $150. "It was then," he said later, "it struck me that the telegraph was just about the best thing going. I determined at once to be a telegrapher." His luck was in. Late that summer, waiting at Mount Clemens Station, he plucked a 3-year-old boy from the path of a boxcar rolling toward him. The grateful father, the railroad station master, James Mackenzie, offered telegraph lessons as a reward. 5 months later, Al changed his boyhood name to Tom and wandered Middle America as one of the hundreds of young tramp telegraph operators, preceded by such budding stars as Andrew Carnegie and Theodore Vail. The end of the Civil War brought an upsurge in telegraph traffic. In ravaged Memphis in 1866, 18-year-old Edison got part-time work with the military, where he experimented with ideas for doubling the carrying capacity of the wires. He was fired for his pains. "Any damn fool," yelled the officer in charge, "ought to know that a wire can't be worked both ways at the same time." Actually, the repeater and duplex experiments were just the beginning of Edison's multiple inventions in telegraphy. In biographer Robert Conant's words, the fountainhead of the most productive inventive career in the history of the world.